With Season 3 Part 2 of Bridgerton recently being released, and it concluding in a way that seemed like the perfect way to round off Penelope's arc as Lady Whistledown, the countdown has already begun for the next season of the show, and for us to wonder about which Bridgerton character will be taking the lead and immersing themselves within romance when the show returns. With it seeming like it's either going to be Francesca or Benedict, let's take a look at all that's out there, and I'll also give my theories and predictions on what I think will happen next. So let's get into it. Here is Bridgerton Season 4, Everything We Know. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The release date. The one thing that's on everybody's mind after that conclusive ending is, when is the next season of the show going to be released? And is there going to be another one, because it really did feel like a finale? Well, the good news is, Netflix greenlit both Season 3 and Season 4 at the same time following the end of Season 2, so a fourth installment of the show is on the way. However, after that, the fate of the show is in question. Although the first part of Season 3 did get some great viewing figures on the platform, which is a good sign for the future. With regards to the release date, that is something that is up in the air. Between Season 2 and Season 3 of the show, we had to wait over 2 years for the 8 episodes to be released. And it very much feels like that's going to be the case here. We did have the Queen Charlotte spin-off show within that time period, which did soften the length of the time that we had to wait. But with no spin-offs in the pipeline at the moment, it very much seems like it's going to be 2 years of no Bridgerton shows until the 4th season arrives. The showrunner of Bridgerton has even mentioned herself that it's looking like it's going to be a while until the next season does hit the platform. She said how they're actually looking to put the seasons out quicker. But with the filming taking around 8 months, then there being an editing process, and also the writing taking a long while as well. By the time all of that has been taken into consideration and been completed, it puts it at around a 2-year cycle. So even though they're trying to speed it up, it's something that inevitably is difficult to do. So when taking that schedule into consideration, it very much seems like we might not be getting Season 4 of Bridgerton until around the summer of 2026. And when you say it like that, it feels like absolutely ages away. The story. With regards to the story for Season 4 of the show, I think there are 2 different directions that the show could go in. It could either be heavily focused on Francesca, John Stirling, and Eloise in Scotland, or it could stay closer to home and look to be centered around Benedict and the novel that focused on him. Especially with it seeming as though he gained a new sense of direction at the end of Season 3 and a general feeling of happiness. It's difficult to say which one is going to happen because there are specific timelines that take place for each. For example, Benedict's love story essentially happens 1 year from when the finale of Season 3 ended. Within his story, he essentially goes on to meet somebody called Sophie Beckett at the masquerade ball that his mother throws. This ball was mentioned in his goodbye conversation with Eloise before she left for Scotland, so it does make me think that we could potentially cut to a year down the line. I suppose, if you think about it, the end of Season 3 was at least 9 months later as Penelope had just given birth to her and Colin's baby, so that would mean that it wouldn't actually be that much of a time jump. Whereas with Francesca, it's said that shortly after they got to Scotland, John died due to a brain aneurysm, but Francesca is said to have mourned him for a couple of years before ultimately being able to move on. The thing with Francesca's story is that within the novel, John's cousin was a male named Michael, and following John's death and her mourning period, Francesca and Michael actually ended up together. They got married and also had 2 children, one which they named after Michael's cousin John. Whereas now, within the show, with John's cousin being introduced to us as Michaela and being a female, it very much feels like that's going to change everything that was set to happen with Francesca's story. When Michaela was first introduced to Francesca, it was clear to see that there was some kind of electricity between the pair. But with them being unable to have children, I wonder how they're going to go about securing an heir to the Earl of Kilmartin. So it makes the romance a little bit different. I wonder if Francesca is going to remarry for the sake of having an heir, but actually be pursuing her love for Michaela if that does end up unfolding. Within the novel, Francesca does lose a child, and that child was John's. So I suppose if they want there to be a direct heir, they could still include the story of Francesca being pregnant with John's baby, but maybe she just doesn't lose it. So it seems like Francesca's story will most likely need to deviate from the book quite a bit. So that's a story that we could end up seeing happening in the next season of the show. However, if the show is going to go down the route of Benedict's story, which could be likely, it's just as compelling and as romantic of a story as Francesca's. And it's one that I imagine would most likely stay a bit more true to the novel, as there aren't too many changes that have been put in place that would alter that. As I mentioned, we know the ball is happening, so the foundations have been set. After he spent the night at the ball with Sophie, she then disappeared for 6 months, and after he looked for her, he wasn't able to find her. It was 2 years later where they reunited by chance and ultimately fell in love. Their love story is one that does have complexities to it, but in the end, they do ultimately end up together and have 4 children with one another. It does seem like there's a 2-year period between Benedict and Sophie, which could coincide with Francesca's mourning period for John Stirling. So maybe, rather than just one of those stories happening in the show, they could both ultimately end up happening and playing out at the same time. As well as that, I also think we're going to be seeing Violet Bridgerton and Marcus Anderson's romance being explored. Violet said how she was ready to be romantically engaged with somebody again for the first time in a long while, and it seems like Marcus could be that person. As you can see, there are a few different directions that the next season of the show could go in. I'm intrigued to see which route it does ultimately go down, but it does very much seem like it's going to be Francesca or Benedict. The cast. With regards to the cast, there hasn't been any announcements on characters that will be returning to the show. But based on the end of Season 3, I think it's quite easy to predict which characters will be returning. I think we'll see Francesca, Lord Kilmartin, Violet Bridgerton, Marcus Anderson, Eloise, Benedict, Lady Danbury, Queen Charlotte, and Mr. and Mrs. Mondrich all returning. With regards to Penelope, Colin, and the Featheringtons, even though she put an end to her alias, which was Lady Whistledown, the showrunner has confirmed that Penelope and Colin will be returning to the show. So with their return, that also means that we'll most likely see Portia Featherington, Prudence Featherington, and also Philippa Featherington with their husbands. As well as that, we were also introduced to Michaela Stirling. As I mentioned in the story section of this video, she's most likely going to be crucial to the plot that we're going to be seeing developing, so she's a character that we'll most definitely be seeing more of. As well as that, I imagine if we're spending a lot of time in Scotland, then we'll most likely be introduced to a wide array of new characters from that setting. Plus, if the story is coinciding with Benedict as well, that means we could also potentially be introduced to Sophie Beckett. With regards to characters that might not be returning, with Cressida becoming a victim of her own games in this season of the show, we saw that she was carted off to live with her aunt in Wales. So unless there's a surprise and she manages to make her way back, I think that could well mean that she's now been written out of the show. As well as that, with Anthony and Kate going off to India to see the country and Kate's family before she gives birth, that could mean that they could be out for the next season of the show too. Unfortunately for now, that's all that's known about Bridgerton Season 4. I'm sure more information will be released as time goes on. But for now, I guess all we can do whilst we're waiting is rewatch the previous seasons, the Queen Charlotte show, and delve into the books. So, there you have it, Bridgerton Season 4, everything we know. If you want to see more videos on Bridgerton, then click on the card in the top corner, or alternatively you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. What do you think will happen next? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thanks for tuning into the video and I'll see you in the next one.